namaskar friends and welcome once again. We have seen that in contemporary times lot of people suffer from stress, mental fatigue and you know they have wellness issues, and this is emerging as one of the leading causes of depression in the modern times. Especially the world is so competitive and we are living in that, and we have to stretch to our limits in order to meet the expectations of our society, our profession and our own self. So, in this lecture we are going to address this issue, how holistic wellness is addressed in the Indian knowledge system. Well, throughout these discussions we have seen that Indian knowledge system, rather than treating the different skills that we categorize under the umbrella heading soft skills as outer attributes, has always tried to get into the roots of them and has treated it as something that is internal and not external attribute. So, let us see how this problem of wellness has been addressed in our Indian knowledge system. So, the contemporary discourse on soft skills, as I said, encompassing emotional intelligence, communication, adaptability and resilience, often presents these abilities as tools for professional success within neoliberal economies. So, they are treated as attributes that can be trained, that can be controlled and so can contribute to a more productive self. So, they are framed as competencies to be acquired, optimized and deployed in order to enhance productivity, leadership and interpersonal efficiency. However, when read alongside Indian lifestyle approaches to wellness, such as those articulated in Ayurveda and Yoga, soft skills appear less as discrete trainable attributes and more as derivative fragments of a deeply integrated philosophy of living. So, friends, as I said, the Indian knowledge system looks at soft skills as something that is embedded in our consciousness, in our existence and is manifested in our external behavior as well. So, it is not treated as attributes that are external and can be trained and can be channelized. So, this contrast is not merely cultural, it is also epistemological. While modern soft skills discourse isolates traits from for instrumental use, Indian knowledge systems embed these traits within a holistic framework of ethical, physiological and spiritual well-being. So, attributes, rather than being instruments to be used for particular purposes, are embedded deeply in our existence itself, and they are part of not only our physiological attributes, they are also part of our ethical and spiritual well-being. So, let us begin with the concept of swadhyaya. What is swadhyaya? It is self awareness, resilience beyond productivity. In corporate and educational settings, self awareness is typically linked to emotional intelligence. So, people believe that you know your emotions, you anticipate others' emotions, you are emotionally intelligent, and if you are emotionally intelligent, then you are self aware. So, it is treated as the ability to recognize and regulate one's emotions for better decision making and interpersonal functioning. Yet, in texts like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the concept of swadhyaya or self study extends far beyond psychological introspection. It is not psychological introspection alone. It involves a disciplined engagement with the self as a layered entity, body, mind and consciousness, requiring sustained practices such as meditation, reflection and ethical living. So, knowing oneself is not knowing one's body, it is also knowing one's mind and consciousness. So, in this sense, what contemporary frameworks treat as a cognitive skill is, within Indian traditions, a lifelong ethical and existential practice. The reduction of such a concept to workplace efficiency risks flattening its transformative potential. If you just treat it as something that enhances your productivity or performance at job, you may be missing out something seriously. You may be missing out its transformative potential, its ability to change your entire thought process. So, similarly, the modern emphasis on emotional regulation and stress management finds a parallel in the idea of samatva or equanimity. We have talked about it earlier as well. I am reiterating it once again. This concept comes from the Bhagavad Gita. So, in corporate discourse, resilience is often understood as the capacity to endure pressure, adapt quickly and maintain performance under stress. So, they believe that somebody who can cope up with the stress and perform under pressure is resilient. But in the Gita's formulation, samatvam yoga uchyate, that means positions, I mean equanimity, not as endurance alone, but as a reorientation of one's relationship to action and outcome. So, it is not your endurance, resilience is not your endurance, rather it is your ability to reorient your relationship to action and outcome. It is your ability to look at action and outcome with a different lens. It is not about coping with stress to remain productive, but about cultivating a mental steadiness that transcends success and failure alike. So, if you are just treating your stress temporarily and increasing your productivity, that means you have pain in your body, but you have taken pills, and under the influence of the pills you continue to work believing that your pain has been alleviated. But the fact is the pain is already there, only under the influence of the medicine you are feeling that numbness, and that is why you are not able to really feel it. So, you are working under stress, but temporarily you have learned how to manage that stress and keep working. But then the Indian framework does not treat your endurance just like that, rather it believes in cultivating an endurance that comes from within, endurance in your approach and attitude which comes from within. So, in contemporary settings, resilience can sometimes become a mechanism that normalizes overwork and systemic stress, whereas the Gita's approach implicitly critiques such conditions by detaching well-being from external achievement. Well-being is not contingent upon our external achievement. It is something that comes from within. When you feel good about yourself, you feel satisfied, you feel better, you feel energetic, it comes from within. So, communication, often celebrated as a core soft skill in contemporary professional discourse, is typically framed in terms of effectiveness, clarity, persuasion, influence and strategic impact. We believe that if we are clear in our communication, if we are persuasive enough, if we are able to create influence and create strategic impact upon the other party, our communication is top class. However, in texts like the Bhagavad Gita, speech or walk is not merely a communicative act, but a moral and ontological practice embedded within a broader framework of self discipline and social responsibility. So, communication is not always about what you speak, but then it is also about whether you would have spoken that in a particular context. Fine. So, the Gita, particularly in its discussions of tapas, that is discipline, introduces the idea of austerity of speech. What is that? Vak tapas, speech that is truthful, satya, non harmful, ahimsa, and beneficial, hitam. Earlier also, friends, we have stressed on this by quoting Satyam Briyat Priyam Briyat. So, speech has to be austere speech, that is vak tapas, speech that is truthful, non harmful and beneficial. So, you cannot speak anything and everything unless and until you are convinced that whatever you speak is truthful, non harmful and beneficial to yourself and to others. This formulation radically shifts the purpose of communication towards maintaining harmony within oneself and in relation to others. So, apart from the utilitarian concept of communication as being productive, as being an instrument of assertiveness and persuasive power, it turns out to be something that brings people together and helps them live in harmony. This formulation radically shifts the purpose of communication. In contrast, modern communication training often privileges assertiveness and persuasive power, as I said, which while useful in competitive environments can easily slide into subtle forms of coercion, manipulation or self promotion. So, our communication is not always taking care of others, rather it is directed towards self promotion or manipulation, we call it strategy, and it easily turns coercive in that we try to dominate the other person. The ethical question, should something be said and in what spirit, is very important, but then this is frequently overshadowed by a pragmatic question, how effectively can it be said? Well, the Indian framework says that the first thing that should be asked is that should something be said, and if at all that has to be said, in what spirit it has to be said. But then the pragmatic question that governs our modern day communication, professional communication, it says how effectively can it be said. In Ayurvedic thought, vak is closely linked to prana, that is vital energy, and excessive, aggressive or untruthful speech is believed to disturb internal balance, particularly aggravating vata dosha. Here communication is not simply external expression, but an embodied act with physiological consequences. So, friends, it does not affect the other party alone, it also affects you and it affects your mind and your body as well. So, this stands in stark contrast to contemporary models that treat communication as a largely cognitive and social skill detached from the body and its rhythms. Of course, we talk about body language, but still we believe that communication is largely cognitive and a social skill. So, we hardly pay that much attention. In fact, we try to match our body with the message that we are passing. But the fact is, the body itself communicates the message and gets affected by the message. So, the result is a framework that can encourage constant articulation, meetings, presentations, networking, without accounting for the energetic depletion or imbalance such communicative excess may produce. So, we indulge in lot of communication all the time. We are conducting meetings, making presentations, communicating with people in order to network, but we hardly bother about the energetic depletion or imbalance this kind of communicative excess produces and affects us in ways that we hardly bother about. Moreover, the ethical dimension of restraint, knowing when not to speak, is largely absent in modern soft skills pedagogy. We find that people believe that communication means speaking. They do not know when is the time to restrain themselves from speaking. Silence in Indian system has always been treated as priceless. So, silence in many Indian traditions is not a lack of communication, but a deliberate and meaningful practice. Maun. You might have heard about Maun Brata. Gandhiji used to practice that, our sages used to practice that. They did not adopt Maun Brata, the vow not to speak for some days or some months or for a lifetime also. They did it because they knew that by doing that they will get a time to reflect, to direct their attention inward rather than outward. So, silence in many Indian traditions is not a lack of communication, but a deliberate and meaningful practice, that is mauna, allowing for reflection, attentiveness and the avoidance of unnecessary harm. In contrast, contemporary environments often equate silence with passivity or lack of confidence, thereby privileging continuous verbal participation. So, friends, anybody who is found silent during the meetings, observing, evaluating whatever is being said, is considered to be, passive, not contributing. But the fact is, he is contributing by observing. Fine. So, the capacity for thoughtful restraint, which is central to both ethical living and mental clarity, is thus undervalued in modern times. But silence is very important in any kind of communication. This comparison between the modern soft skills and our Indian tradition reveals how communication in modern soft skills discourse is deeply shaped by neoliberal imperatives of visibility, performance and productivity. Whereas Indian wellness traditions by contrast resituate communication within a relational and ethical ecology, where speech is accountable not only to immediate outcomes, but also to long term well being of the self, the community and even the environment. So, their communication is made meaningful by timing it to perfection, by ensuring that it is not indulging in excessive communication, or by ensuring that it is not coercive or thoughtless. Discipline and time management, as they are commonly framed in a contemporary soft skills discourse, are closely tied to ideals of efficiency, productivity and optimization. So, to be disciplined is to be punctual, goal oriented and capable of structuring one's time in a way that maximizes measurable output. So, in the modern times when we talk about discipline and dinacharya or time management, we always look at it from the point of view of performance. So, somebody who can remain timely, punctual, is goal oriented and structures one's time in a way that maximizes output is considered discipline. In such a method or model, the body and its rhythms often appear as obstacles to be managed rather than as integral guides to living well. So, disciplined people, for them what is important is the performance of a task within a given frame, whether the body allows or not. So, they are not ready to look at the bodily symptoms. In contrast, within Ayurveda, the concept of dinacharya, that is daily regimen or daily routine, it offers a fundamentally different orientation. Here discipline is not imposed upon time, but emerges from an attunement to natural cycles. What is that? The rising and setting of the sun, digestive rhythms, seasonal variations and fluctuations in energy throughout the day. So, in Indian tradition, people are always taught to time their dinacharya or daily regimen according to nature. All of us know that nature runs on cosmic energy and there are energy cycles. So, in India it is believed that early to rise, early to bed makes a man healthy, wealthy and wise. But then unfortunately in the modern times we do not believe in that, because the corporate working environment does not believe in natural cycles. So, time in this framework is not an abstract uniform unit to be managed, but a qualitative experience shaped by the interplay of body, environment and cosmic order. Discipline therefore becomes a practice of synchronization rather than control. Fine. So, in Indian system it is believed that if you time your action to the nature, obviously there will be natural energy and you did not you would not have a compulsion to impose it on your body. The body itself will act according to the energy that is generated as a result of the interplay of body, environment and cosmic order. So, this divergence has significant implications when viewed critically. The modern valorization of discipline often masks a deeper disregard for embodied limits. You may have come across lot of such incidents where somebody did not sleep for days because he or she has had to complete a task within that framework and finally suffered a nervous breakdown or collapsed. So, the modern valorization of discipline often disregards the embodied limits, the limits of our body and the bodily requirements, and as a result we suffer lot of health issues and mental issues later on. Long working hours, irregular sleep patterns and the normalization of constant availability enabled by digital technologies. Now, your companies would say that you do not have to switch off your mobile or your laptop and be available SOS, that is whenever required. Now, as a result even if you are in the washroom or you are in the puja room or you are taking a nap, anytime your mobile phone can ring and disturb you. So, these are frequently justified in the name of dedication and efficiency. The person who is always available is treated as most efficient and dedicated. Yet from an Ayurvedic perspective, and we have seen the consequences, friends, now even the doctors are also asking us to regulate our sleep cycles, rest between the work, and also detach ourselves from the technological gadgets, so that we can rest completely. Otherwise, even if we are pretending to rest, we are not resting. Yet from an Ayurvedic perspective, such practices should be seen as disruptions of dosic balance, leading over time to fatigue, stress and chronic illness. And we have seen there is a rise in all these problems in the modern times, and much of it may be attributed to our disregard to our body and the bodily and environmental cycles. What is celebrated as discipline in contemporary settings may thus be interpreted as a form of systematic self override, where individuals are trained to ignore bodily signals in order to meet external demands. The burden of being disciplined falls on the individual. Manage your time better, optimize your routine, eliminate distractions. Well, this is how we are asked to optimize our output without adequately addressing the institutional and economic pressures that produce time scarcity in the first place. Now, the institutions are not ready to believe that they are the real culprits. They are creating such pressures and timelines that are too strict for the body to cope up with. So, rather than controlling them, the individuals are asked to channelize their energy and discipline themselves according to their demands. So, in this sense, discipline becomes a moralized expectation, where failure to keep up is framed as a personal deficiency rather than a reflection of unsustainable system. So, system itself is unsustainable, but then and puts lot of pressure on its employees, but ultimately employees, if they do not meet the requirements or the deadlines, they are made to believe that they are inefficient. Calmness, shanti, the ground of being and balance. Calmness, what is that? In contemporary discourse, it is often reduced to a desirable psychological state associated with reduced stress, emotional composure and the ability to function effectively under pressure. Again, calmness is also not treated as Sat Chit Anand. Fine, it is treated as the momentary composure, momentary ability to compose oneself and again work. It is frequently framed as a coping mechanism within high performance environments, a way to remain focused, avoid burnout and sustain productivity. In traditions like yoga, calmness is not merely the absence of agitation, but the stabilization of consciousness itself. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali define yoga as a chittavritti nirodha, that is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. Can we control the fluctuations of the mind? The mind, typically characterized by constant movement, desire, fear, memory, anticipation, is gradually trained to rest in a state of clarity and steadiness. So, till this desire, fear, memory, anticipation goes completely out of mind, you cannot really cultivate calmness. This state is not passive or inert, rather it is deeply alert, attentive and aware, free from the distortions caused by mental turbulence. So, when we talk about shanti, shanti is the cultivation of that inner rhythm and inner peace, avoiding all the mental turbulence and tension. So, meditative practices like dhyana, they play a central role in cultivating this form of calmness, but believe me friends, it is not that easy. Lot of people go to meditate, but then they are not able to control their fleeting fancies or chitta vritis. So, unlike many contemporary relaxation techniques that aim to immediate relief, meditation in the Indian philosophical context is a discipline of attention. So, it takes you weeks and months in order to come to that level where you can really focus your attention on something that you desire to concentrate on. So, it involves sustained engagement with the present moment, whether through breath, mantra or observation, leading to a gradual quietening of mental noise. So, friends, time comes when the outside turbulence subsides completely. It is not that that is absent, but you control your senses in such a way that you are not affected by the turbulence outside. Importantly, this quieting is not an escape from reality, but a way of encountering it more directly without the habitual filters of anxiety, distraction or reactive judgment. This has profound implications for wellness. Rather than seeking to control or eliminate stressors, the focus shifts to cultivating a mental state that can hold experience without fragmentation. Wellness then is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of a stable, coherent self in the midst of it. So, it teaches you how to remain steady and calm even in the face of the most difficult situations. If you master that art of that stable self, the stressors will no longer stress you. From an Ayurvedic perspective, calmness is associated with the balance of dosas, particularly the regulation of Vata. We have already talked about Vata, Pitta and Kapha. So, the Vata governs movement, nervous activity and mental fluctuations. So, practices that promote calmness, regular routines, mindful eating, adequate rest and meditation, they are understood to stabilize the nervous system and support overall health. So, in the contemporary scenario marked by constant connectivity, information overload and the pressure to remain perpetually active, calmness has become both more necessary and more elusive. Without calmness, you will have the danger of suffering a mental problem or a mental breakdown. But then even if you try, you are living in a world which is governed by constant movement, and so cultivating calmness is really very challenging. Digital environments fragment attention, accelerate thought and create a sense of continuous urgency. We always believe that something is happening and we have to keep pace with that. We want to know everything, and in that we do not take rest. In such contexts, calmness is often commodified, packaged into quick fix solutions such as mindfulness apps, wellness products or corporate training modules. But then this is something that is cultivated over time. It requires tapas, discipline. So, when calmness is valued only for its ability to enhance focus or efficiency, it becomes subsumed within the very systems of acceleration and performance that generate unrest in the first place. So, it really does not help, because the same systems give you stress and they try to quick fix it. Indian philosophical traditions invite a different approach, one that views calmness as a foundational condition for ethical living, clear thinking and meaningful action. So, there is no quick solution to our calmness problems. It has to be cultivated repeatedly by following a self and inner discipline. Reframed in this way, calmness becomes central to a more holistic understanding of wellness, one that integrates mental clarity, emotional balance and bodily harmony. It offers not just a way to cope with contemporary pressures, but a critical lens through which to question them, asking whether the pace and structure of modern life are themselves conducive to well-being. So, we need to ask what we are doing, the kind of lifestyle that we are following, is that desirable, is that what is conducive to well-being. Taken together, these intersections suggest that contemporary soft skills are not entirely new, but rather selective re-articulations of older holistic traditions of self cultivation, now reframed for modern institutional contexts. So, we believe that the modern times have tried to appropriate these traditional practices of meditation and yoga for holistic health, but not in the way they should be followed. Rather, they have tried to appropriate it according to their own needs. So, practices rooted in systems like yoga and Ayurveda were originally embedded within ethical, embodied and metaphysical frameworks. In their current form, however, they are often extracted and repackaged as discrete functional competencies valued primarily for their role in enhancing productivity, employability and performance. So, only one aspect of their benefit is taken into consideration, how it can contribute to our modern day economy. Other aspects of it like mental wellness, like physical health, they are not paid any attention to. So, mindfulness becomes a stress management tool rather than a sustained inquiry into consciousness. Resilience becomes the ability to endure pressure rather than question its sources. Moreover, these frameworks often align with neoliberal logics that individualize responsibility, placing the burden of adaptation, regulation and well-being on the individuals while leaving broader structural conditions unexamined. So, they do not look at the systems that are creating such situations where the individuals are suffering and are subjected to problems related to their well-being. Rather, it looks at the individuals and their capacity to channelize their energy to cope up with these stressors and come up with mechanisms that might help them stand resilient in the face of such systems. So, in this process, soft skills risk reinforcing a culture where individuals are trained to cope with imbalance rather than transforming it. So, friends, in the nutshell, I would like to say that the Indian knowledge system looks at the root cause of stressors and tries to address this issue by treating it from the roots itself rather than treating it as some problem that is generated by outside factors, and so regulating those outside factors will regulate it automatically. But of course, the outside agencies, let us say institutions and others need to seriously rethink their strategy in order to create a working environment where the individuals are provided their space to keep their body, mind and spirit together rather than stretching themselves to the point where they feel like breaking. So, thank you very much for your kind attention. Please join me for the next class. Thank you.